Yo, and welcome to the 181st episode of Lake of Rage, a Pokemon Trading Card Game Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Kevin Clemente, aka Mellow_Magikarp. I'm joined by three very special temporary guest hosts. We have three players who are going to be playing in the upcoming Mérida Regional Championships, the very first one of the Prismatic Evolutions format. I'm going to introduce them to you real quick, but a real quick housekeeping, we're going to be skipping next week because I'm going to play in a League Cup, my first League Cup in like the whole season practically. So I'm excited, but that means we're taking a week off, so you're not going to see me in your feed, but don't worry, we'll be back with some EUIC stuff in the future. But that's not what you're here for my updates. You're here for the meta discussions. We're going to talk about some of the best decks. And if you're going to your own League Cup, I think you're going to get some good information out of this as well. So I'm going to go in counterclockwise order for those of you watching on YouTube. We're going to start with the top left. That is Dre, aka King Dre Clout. Dre, how long you been playing and what are some of your accomplishments?
Well, this is my third season playing in like sanctioned events. So we're about 2.5 years now. Top 16 Fresno, top 32 Pittsburgh, quite a few top 64s. Not any top 8s yet. Hoping Merida's that one that we get.
And next, in the bottom left corner, we have your favorite content creator's favorite content creator, Pablo Meza, aka Tablemon. Pablo, how long you been playing and what are some of those accomplishments?
Thank you, Kevin. I've now been playing for, I think, 25 years now. And some of my accomplishments, top 4 and top 8 at different worlds, a couple regional wins in the modern era, and a few top 8s and top 4s here and there as well. Latest top 4 at EUIC in 2023.
I always love, I'm just going to throw out there because you are a caster so much first and foremost that I feel like people who've maybe been joining the game more lately might have missed that. 2 top cut in the world championships in the history, in addition to a handful of regional championships. So always someone I want to remind people, not just a YouTuber, not just a caster, but pretty good player.
Thank you.
And speaking of pretty good players, we're going to round it out with the person who I believe is #1 in the world at the time of recording. We have Brent Tonisson. Brent, how long have you been playing? What are some of those accomplishments?
I've been playing for I think 12.5 years now. I've won 4 regionals, and I got second in IC recently, early IC, and yeah, I'm currently the rank 1 player in the world.
So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to talk a little bit about what we expect to be the most played decks, because despite the set having almost no good cards, the meta is going to change rapidly and wildly. At least I'm expecting it to. So we'll see what you all think are going to be the top most played decks heading into day 1, as well as which decks are going to actually see some amount of success. And then we'll dive into each of those individual decks. Are they good? Are they not? Or are they just going to be played? So we're going to start with I'm going to say 5, but you can always extend that out or do a little bit less. What are the 5 most played decks? And what's a general percentage you would expect them to be played into day 1? Dre, why don't you go and start us off on that one?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go off. Start with a hot take right away and say that I think Dragapult might be the BDIF. So I think it's gonna be #1 most played. I think it could be anywhere between 18 to 15%. Just seeing how like it's been almost #1 in every online tournament. I've been playing a lot more online tournaments than I have in previous like formats, and it seems like it's always the most played in each tournament, and rightly so. I've been playing it myself. I got a top cut in an online tournament with it for the first night I played it. It just seemed really powerful. So I can see anywhere 18 to 15% for that one. I think the second most played deck will probably be Lugia. There's a lot of people that have reps with Lugia that feel comfortable with it. It's really strong. It has a direct counter with the Regidrago, one of the 2 good cards that we get that counters Dragapult, and I can see that being somewhere around 12 to 10%. Third, that's where it seems to get tough. I think 1 and 2, I feel like they could be interchanged. 3, I want to say it's going to be Guardy, because a lot of people enjoy it. A lot of people have reps with it. Same thing like Lugia. A lot of people have been playing it for a long time. But I don't know how highly played it'll be. I can see it being sub 10% because there's a decent amount of people that like to play it, but in a best of 3, it's kind of scary to play. Slower format makes it even scarier to play. And it's also just a really hard deck to play. And so 4th, I want to say it's Miraidon. I think Miraidon's right there. It's in a good spot. It gives all 3 of the top decks fits. You just gotta hit your generators. I think that could be in the same thing, probably maybe 8 to 10%. The 5th most played deck is kind of a tough one. And I think it might just be the bridge. I think it might be Archaludon. It's been getting popular lately. It's not very hard punished by Budew. It gives a lot of weird like price trades because of the Turo, the Cyclone. At least for my testing, I've seen it can mess up price trades, and that's what it does best. And it's a big tank, does 220, which is a lot of damage. So that was probably the top 5. And Archaludon, I don't know, maybe like 6% ish, 7.
Just for the sake of clarity, you said Pult as the number 1. That's going to be Pult Dusknoir, correct?
Yeah, Pult Dusknoir. Yeah, I mean, you could throw Pult Thorns in there, but I don't think it's as good as Pult Dusknoir.
Perfect. Pablo, what about you? What are those top like 5 or 6 decks you're kind of expecting in day 1?
I mean, actually, the exact same as Dre. I expect Dragapult to be the number 1. I think the hype behind it is undeniable. The results online so far, and at City Leagues and whatnot, the deck definitely gets a boost by everything slowing down. So I expect that to be anywhere between 13 and 15%. And then I think Gardevoir will be number 2 at around 12%. I think that's a deck that a lot of people have been playing for a while. They know clearly it's going away, so they might want to give it a go. And it's also a very easily accessible deck, very inexpensive. So I reckon that's going to be quite popular. And then Lugia at number 3. A lot of people have a lot of reps, like Dre said. Popular deck, leaving the format soon. So people want to use it one last time. And then Archaludon and Miraidon probably tied between 4th and 5th with around 7 to 8%. They're solid decks, they're straightforward decks, and Miraidon definitely has, in theory, a good matchup against the top 3. But it needs to high roll that turn 1. If it's like, it comes down to you get that turn 1 Iron Hands, and it doesn't get responded, you win. If it gets responded, then you're out. So it's a very high risk, high reward, and when trying not to tie a lot, it definitely makes sense to give it a go.
So I want to press you a little bit on that high rollness of Miraidon you just mentioned, because you're someone who generally is very precise with their words. When you say Miraidon has to high roll it, is that something that doesn't happen a whole lot, getting that turn 1 Iron Hands, or is it just a boom or bust, you have to do it or else the deck's not good?
I think it's do or die at that point. It's if Miraidon doesn't get that turn 1 Iron Hands, if it gets a Raikou attack or a Miraidon attack, getting a single prize on your first turn, and you have to do it going second, of course, before you get body locked, because you need the combination of items and supporters in the same turn. Like, it's just the amount of times it happens is definitely good enough to compete, but not good enough for me to consider it consistent, if you will. So not a fan of those sort of strategies, but it's definitely viable.
Perfect, thank you. And then Brent, same exact question, top 5 or 6 decks?
Yeah, so top 5. I'm actually really not sure with the top 3 in their position between Pult, Lugia, and Gardevoir. I think Lugia is going to be played a lot more than it says the play rate is online. I saw at Brazil, I saw that Lugia was played a lot. I'm not sure if Mexico will be similar to that, but I'm guessing they might just be similar where they'll just play a lot of Lugia. I mean, Lugia's in a really good position. I really like the deck at the moment. It might even be number 1, to be honest. And then between Pult and Gardevoir, I think it's going to be a lot closer than Dre said. I think people are very comfortable with Gardevoir, and Pult is something that people haven't been touching in a while. And I think a lot of people are going to play with what they're comfortable with. So I think that Gardevoir is probably going to be very close in play rate to Pult, and I think they're both right near the top. And in the city leagues as well, Gardevoir is actually performing better at the higher tier. So I believe, like, if you look at the rankings, it's scaled better at the highest tiers towards the end of it. So I'm not really sure. Like, I haven't tested enough to really say which one like definitively is better, but I think they're like right up there, especially with Lugia as the top 3 decks. As for 4th, 5th, 6th, I think I'm looking at Bridge, Charizard, and I guess Ceruledge. So the reason I don't think Miraidon's there is because historically people just don't play Miraidon even when it's a good play. And I don't really know why. I think half it has to do with people just don't like relying on Generator. So even when Miraidon is statistically a good play, has good matchups and everything, people still refuse to play it. And I think that's why Miraidon won't be in the top 6, even though it is a top 6 deck.
Interesting, perfect. So it sounds like we have agreement on the top 3, so we're going to dive into each of those decks, and then we can kind of dive into those others. Actually, all of you said Archaludon as well, but then maybe the Miraidon, Ceruledge, etc. after. So that first one that has come up, it's been everywhere. That's Dragapult Dusknoir, right? This was the deck that was incredibly hyped out of Japan. Lance Full Art went back up to a $10 card, even though, whatever, right? Badoo's going to break this thing, blah, blah, blah. You've all heard it. All the listeners have heard it. In fact, we've hyped it up last week with Tim on the podcast. So I want to go into Dragapult. Are you expecting it to see success? Is it a deck that can actually win the tournament? And then in general, what is the deck afraid of? Or what does the deck want to feast on? If that makes sense. Like, what are the matchups the deck wants? Is it absolutely body Guardy, and that's why it's so good? Does it get bodied by Guardy? Pablo, can you start us off? Are you expecting a lot of success out of Dragapult, and you think it's a deck that could win the tournament?
Yes to both. I think it's extremely solid. I don't think it has any super favorable matchups other than Charizard, which it shouldn't be that popular. I think if it stabilizes and it doesn't fall too far behind before it has the chance to get like back-to-back Dragapults, it's super strong. And I think that's exactly what Budew allows, right? Budew slows the other deck down in order to give you that little bit of wiggle room so that your Dracloaks or 3-piece just don't just go down immediately, right? And then with the back of Dusknoir to help with any damage counter placement at the other side of the field. Like I said, I don't think it has any super favorable matchups. It likes Miraidon when it doesn't get the Iron Hands or it is able to wall that second attack off. But other than that, I feel like it's a good 50-50 deck into everything. And it's 50-50 because of the randomness of turn one. If it sets up, then it starts to be more favorable against other things. It probably doesn't enjoy playing against Lugia too much because that's where Budew is the least effective. But a Temple of Sinnoh here and there can definitely help things.
Brent, what are your thoughts on Dragapult Dusknoir in the same vein?
Well, I did kind of practice it the last few days. I think the deck's really good, and after playing it, I'm not sure if it's just because I have a lot of experience with Guardy, but I think it's a lot harder than Gardevoir to play. Like, playing against Gardevoir, there's just certain things that I have to do to not just put myself in a losing position early on. So, after playing that matchup, I know it's actually, it's something that I have to really think about, and it's really difficult, so I'm not entirely sure how well positioned it is yet, because I need to also improve on myself to actually get closer to the matchups. Like, for me to beat Gardevoir, I'm gonna have to get better as Dragapult to start beating Gardevoir. So I'm not, I can't accurately say what the matchup is yet, but I'm a little bit more confident in things like the Lugia matchup. I think, especially with Temple, I think it's probably a lot closer than people would think. People probably think Lugia does a lot better into it than I think it actually does. And honestly, I haven't really tested into the rest, but I think, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just really strong to the rest based on the results that I've seen.
And Dre, you had already called it immediately the BDIF in this format. So I assume you're going to say it's good, but why did you call it the BDIF?
I think it just has so many different win cons. Is the options that all options it has. Brent said, it's a little bit more difficult than Guardian. Even when I was picking it up, it was really hard for me to find my win cons in the ways. But as soon as I could figure out how I do my Alakazam math, how I fix math with Dusclops, how I can take 4 prize turns against Miraidon by setting up 30, 10, 10, and then popping Dusknoir on their Squawkabilly set up a checkmate kind of board. So there's just so many different ways to manage damage and find your win cons with the deck. The one thing that is sketchy for it though is Lugia being popular, because Regidrago is almost like a direct counter to it. They run 1, but they also play Thornton. Most lists, I think pretty much every list is running Thornton. So they're going to turn that Lumineon into a Regidrago once you kill the Regidrago. So it's you have to kind of get out fast against Lugia. Like Pablo said, Budew doesn't really do much. Your best win con is probably popping the Dusknoir on an Archeops, counter-catching up the non-damage one, trying to wipe those and catch up from there. Other than that, it seems like it's a pretty tough matchup, though. So that seems like that's the biggest win con I've found in the matchup. I think it's really, really good because of the different options it plays. A really good player takes it, knows the deck well, knows the matchups well, they can win the tournament.
The next one we had on our list was kind of between Lugia and Gardevoir, depending on the person. Let's go with Guardy, because we've already kind of mentioned Guardy a little bit, right? So I kind of want to ask, can it win the tournament? But also we want to get a little into Budew versus not. If you know and you've tested that matchup, but that deck at all with or without the Budew, does it add anything, or is it really just the same old Guardy as before and there's no more Regidrago, so we're happy? Brent, why don't you start us off? Guardy, is it good? Can it win? And Budew or not?
I think it's really good. It's like Henry Chow is gonna have a field day this time at this point. I feel like he's having an easy like last format was like hard mode compared to this format. So we're gonna see that guy do really well again. Like he can basically just play like probably like the exact same decks as before with like no changes and expect to see better results. Which I don't really know how, but I guess he's going to have to perform better than before. So what I will say is it definitely is like a bit of a debate with all the remaining tech Pokemon. It's like, you've got your 4-4-2 Curlier, Gardevoir, whatever, 2 monkeys, and then from there it's like, okay, well now we actually have to think. It's like, okay, well do I need Flutter Mane for the mirror? Do I need Klefki? Klefki's good against Miraidon. What about Tomb? And then like what about Budew, Manaphy? I think there's some things where like a Budew, like when I use it, the only time I really wanted it was against like Lugia to punish the slow start. Because if I missed TM Evo and I could Budew them and gain the extra turn, then that was good enough for me. So I wasn't really using it outside of that, surprisingly. So I wouldn't be surprised if I don't need that, because if I just use something like He or Tomb, I can maybe just get away with that instead. So maybe I don't need it. I think Budew plus Manaphy also somewhat compete for a spot, because Budew can punish a lot of the removal, like the multi-attack options like Greninja and Regidrago, Copy and Kyurem. But I still think out of those two, I'd still rather Manaphy. So I feel like with those things, Budew might not make the cut in the long run. You might see a lot of it early on. Another one that's going to be interesting is Crest, because if the matchup against Dragapult is difficult, Crest is a card that does improve your win rate in that matchup. So if people are deciding this matchup's too hard and start playing Crest, then the matchup will go towards Gardevoir's favor. But one of the cool things with Gardevoir is there are enough tech options and they kind of can help in any matchup, that Gardevoir technically has the ability to basically beat everything. It just kind of comes down to what you pick and choose to deal with, I guess, with like your techs.
And then Dre, same question. Do you expect it to win? And then do you have any other thoughts on any of the techs beyond Budew as well, like Brent did?
Well, I mean, I think Badoo's pretty solid. I've used it a lot more than just against Lugia. I've used it a lot of times in the mirror and the Dracloak. It's just like, can I stop you? If you don't have Lance in hand, you don't have TM Evo in hand, I'm probably just going to win. If I get Curlia before you get Dracloak or you get your Curlia, I win. Usually. Other than text, though, like Mawile is kind of like another one that seems to be like being weighed. Like there's not a lot of switch cards being played in Miraidon. They just have maybe one, if that, and then they have the Latias. So being able to just trap something if they get too quick and you just start picking apart their board with monkeys and stuff. I think outside of those that Brent mentioned and maybe the Mawile, though, it seems like I've seen the tools actually kind of be something that's tweaked. The Evo, one Devo, one Charm's kind of been like the common denominator. Some lists will play double Evo, no Devo, Charm. Some will play double Charm, one Evo. But I think 1-1-1 right now is kind of decent. But as far as like the Guardi, like Brent said, Guardi is really, really good. It can beat anything. It just has to, not fall too far behind. And decks like Miraidon hovering around, kind of scary though.
I mean, Pablo, thoughts on Guardi? Can it win the tournament, and any cool tech things?
So unfortunately, I'm a little biased against Guardi right now because I used to leak up a couple days ago, and I went 0-3 drop after not playing a single Arven, Iono, Puffin, Nespel, Artisan, Ultra. I never got a Ralt in play in 3 rounds. And it's like, I mean, I know that's obviously variance, but I've always felt incredibly weak in the early game against Guardi. If you don't get that TM Evo Arven perfect start going first, which I don't think happens often enough. Obviously it's good, obviously it's powerful, it can deal with everything, but only if you survive the early game, right? And it can make amazing comebacks. But I feel like Guardi, in my opinion, is a bad choice for a regional, because it's the one deck that you have a really hard time finding a spot to concede, because it always has the potential to make the comeback. But if they draw off of the Iono, if they draw out of the on first stamp, if you even play it, then you lose a very close game 1 that took 35 minutes. And then you're definitely not going to finish that round, right? Because you're never the aggressor. You're never the one that can apply enough pressure to win a game quickly. So for me personally, like playing from behind every single round, being susceptible to that early game. I mean, obviously Henry Chow is an amazing player, right? But I do feel like there's some inherent variance going with Guardy, which applies to every deck pretty much, right? Like for Miraidon, it's that turn one huge Iron Hands play or huge turn double price knockout. For Guardy, it's a solid turn one that leads you into a late game. But because of that and because of time constraints, I would definitely not be choosing Gardevoir as a deck to have a deep run. And I think another thing to factor into this tournament specifically is that out of the 1,200 Masters players that are going to be there, if 900 of them are Mexican, then 850 of them have probably never played in a regional in their life before. And that means they don't have a lot of best of three experience other than at League Cups, which not a lot of them are run best of three. The atmosphere is definitely a lot more relaxed as well. There's no pressure, judges, I don't know. So overall, I do feel like the pace of play and the tie rate in this particular tournament and probably in Monterrey eventually will be higher because of the inexperience of the local player base. And like I see that locally at my League Cups and League Challenges, and like that translated to best of three. Like if you're playing against a Mexican player that's not very experienced, it's very likely that they might not be playing at a pace, not because they're trying to slow play or anything, just because they're not used to keeping up with those 50 minutes or knowing when to concede. Because in best of one, what's the point of conceding, right? Just play it out. So I feel like that's another thing that's taking me away from Guardy, and that makes me feel like Guardy might not be the best play for this particular tournament, unless you're super experienced and can play turbo mode Guardy, I guess.
So I have a follow-up question to that. A, I think that's incredibly good insight. And B, you mentioned this for Guardy. You don't mention this for Dragapult Dusknoir, which, like, in theory, you're also using Recon Directive, right? You're a bit of a comeback deck, and like you're moving these damage counters to make these big plays. So why does Dragapult, and maybe it does and you just didn't mention it, but why doesn't Dragapult scare you as much for time compared to Guardy?
I mean, it does scare me just a little bit less. Why? Because your main attacker is a two-prizer, right? Like you're not throwing single prizers until like you can throw single prizers, but eventually you have to become a two-prizer. Whereas Guardy can extend the game by throwing single prizers to make their opponent play into 6 turns, right? We've seen that from players. So the two-prize main attacker, and also the fact that Dusknoir and Dusclops essentially speed up the game, right? That extra damage, they give your opponent a prize card. You probably take multiple prize cards on the turn you are doing it. So overall, games, I feel like, take less turns just because you're still a two-price deck. Even if the early game might look a little bit slower, once the Dragapults hit the field, then all of a sudden they're free from the item block, and you're just taking hits left and right. So that's why, and you have liabilities as well in Luminion and Fezandipity on your bench as well most of the time. So that plays into the games being a little bit faster.
That makes sense. The next deck to round out our top 3 is Lugia VSTAR, the deck that never seems to die. Brent, you are a known Lugia lover. Maybe not this version of Lugia, but a version of Lugia in the past. What do you think of Lugia in this tournament? Can it win? Is it a deck that you will play, or is it a deck that, as people say, you need to flip the right coins to actually win with?
I don't know why people think I'm a Lugia lover at all, but I think, funnily enough, people don't really know, but Lugia is probably the deck that I usually have the most games into in any format. And this is just because when I do coaching or things, often Lugia is one of the most common decks people want to test against. So I do play Lugia a lot. The thing with like the coins is just a different type of variance. Decks like Miraidon have generators. In the past, we had VIP and other things. There's all kinds of hidden variants like this, where when you just spam so many coins, the coins aren't really the biggest factor with the variance. A lot of it is just like actually just the quality of the hand in general. Like there's going to be a lot of times there's like if I get the tails and I have Luminion, I've just got the 2 Archeops in the discard. So anyway, I think Lugia is just like in a really strong position for this event. I think out of the top 3, it's the easiest deck to play. If you just learn Lugia, just play a pretty normal list. learn your lines. There's a good chance you can do well. I mean, of course, it's a little bit more prone to variance than the other two, I would say. But that doesn't really stop people from being consistently successful with the deck. If you see like some of the players like in NA, outside of Henry Chow, like the best performing players from NA this season, NA specifically NA regionals as well, is quite literally just Rahul and Kieran. And they were just flying high basically every single tournament. And I think that people will continue to fly high in this format as well.
And then before we jump into Dre, question I forgot to mention. Maybe you're not playing Lugia. Maybe your opponent's playing Lugia. Are you expecting the Wellspring, the Water Ogre Pawn? And what rat line are you expecting the average Lugia to play? For Brent.
Okay, so the average is probably 1-1. I think you're gonna see a lot of 2-2s. I think you're gonna see roughly like 33% 2-2, 33% 1-1, and 33% 0-0. So I think the average is gonna be 1-1. Except fortunately, you'll kind of know the rat is there when the rat comes down. So you'll be able to respond accordingly. So it's probably not that big of a deal when you're playing against it. And then, like, if it's there, it's there. If it's not there, it's not there. And you can just plan around it accordingly.
All right, Dre, Lugia. Is it a deck that can win the tournament? Is it a deck that's actually going to see success?
I think so. I have it up there in the top 3 for a reason. I don't think I would include it up there, but didn't think it would be good enough to win. I think Wellspring Ogre Pawn is going to be played in most of the lists. You need to, especially with a lot of the format slowing down, a lot of stage 2 decks. That's gonna, if they're not getting mana fee down, especially against like Dragapult, they're not playing mana fee. And if Gardevoir prioritizes getting Budew Ralts down, or they can only get Ralts down, they can't get the mana fee down, and you can punish that. So I think Ogre Pawn's pretty good. Can also set up some funky plays against Miraidon by doing that early. If you saw block first and then you spread the damage and then continue after that. But you just gotta fly high. I don't know if I've played Lugia a few times. San Antonio started off 2-0 and then just went 0-3 because I started prizing bad and not drawing well. LAIC was pretty decent. I tied my winning in. And I don't know. I just haven't been on the favorable side, so it's been in my rotation, but it's not feeling like my play.
And then rat line. What kind of rat lines are you expecting?
Yeah, I think rat 1-1 is probably going to be common. You have the 1-1. You probably cut the 2-2 gets cut out for Regigigas and Thornton.
And then Pablo, Lugia. Is it a deck that can win the tournament?
I think so. It hasn't won since the Brazilian tournament. I forgot the location where Yurko won. But yeah, I mean, the deck is extremely powerful once it sets up, right? But it's less fragile, I guess, than Gardevoir in that way. You can get away with one Arceus game sometimes. And like if they're using body, you have the perfect response and read the wind. So that's pretty fantastic. Like Lugia also enjoys a slower game because it gives them more time to get their Arceus and then become incredibly broken. Now, as far as Water Ogre Pawn, I would definitely expect it. And I feel like my sort of mindset is you have to prepare for the worst. So that if the worst happens, then you're fine. You were prepared. And if the worst doesn't happen, then you're probably better off. And I think very few decks would get punished by having mana fee on their bench at any given point against Lugia, even if their opponent isn't playing the Water Ogre Pawn, unless you're like maybe Cardi, it's the one that would really like the bench space. But I think with Cardi especially, it's better safe than sorry. So I do think Lugia has the potential in the right hands. And now, as far as the rat line goes, I feel like I'm leaning more towards it's gonna be at 2-2. I feel like playing a 1-1 requires like a lot of skill in terms of like knowing when you have access to it, knowing you can rely on it. Whereas average players are more likely like trying to find specific lines or like always trying to like they're more susceptible to being emotional in the sense that, oh, I priced my Cinchino when I really needed it, right? Because they were planning, they were making their game-winning plan around that one Cinchino, even though it wasn't available, and therefore they should have gone a different route, right? So I feel like most players are very reactionary that way, and therefore they'd rather play a 2-2 line because that one time they needed that Cinchino and one was priced, they discarded the other, so they're definitely not going to play any less. So I would expect the average to be more towards the 2-2 line.
I'm sure you all have similar stories, but because it happened last night, I'll throw it out there. I was playing Dragapult on ladder. Lugia opponent starts their Lugia, Ultra Ball away, double Archeops for a V-Star, throws down a jamming tower, so I can't even TM Evo, and it's like, dang, this deck's good. Obviously, that doesn't happen every game, but you know, it's kind of scary.
Yep.
The next deck is, maybe Lugia is the biggest beat stick, but I think the most linear beat stick that we've mentioned so far, you all put Archaludon in your top 3. It won the Champions League Osaka. The baby Duraludon KOs a Budew for a single energy. My goodness, what is possibly stopping this deck from winning the tournament? So Archaludon, is it real? Is this the format it finally shows up? Dre, start us off on Archaludon.
Man, I've been a biggest hater on the bridge. I think it's incredibly mid. I don't like the deck personally. The 220 is cool. I think it was better when we had a lot of the turbo decks around. But now that it's slowing down, I mean, having to always Turo and Cyclone, you can bring the price trade back into your favor, but it's like you're relying on hitting that, and then you're not disrupting if you're Turoing. So I don't know. I mean, I just played before this started. I played like an online tournament with Miraidon. I never played against it with Miraidon, and I was like, man, it's kind of a bad matchup. They're just one-shotting everything. I went hands, all 4 energy or electric with the Zapdos and Amp Duraludon. And then they evolved. I bossed Ninja, Amp again because they can't one-shot the hands. And then I Magnetoned Raichu, blew up their, because it's only 300 HP, only need 5 energy. So I don't know. If the deck that it should probably have the best matchup against right now, I can beat it pretty easily like that. I don't think it's that great.
My man said only 300 HP. Like, what world is this?
I just started playing 2.5 years ago. I wasn't around when you guys were playing, like, when the 2 prizes were like 180 HP. I wasn't around for that.
Hey, Tapu Lele was a great card. That 170 was a tank. Pablo, Archaludon.
I think Pablo was playing when 2 prizes had 100 HP. Like, even less.
I was playing when 2 prizes were invented, dude. Like,
Right. Real.
Regardless of their HP, I saw them come to life. But yeah, Archaludon, 100% real. I definitely think it's underestimated a little bit because it's linear, right? It's like mid in the sense that you don't have too many options, right? And pulling off the Star Chronos with Lugia VSTAR, if they're even playing it, is not exactly easy, right? It means you had like a no pressure turn where you're able to bench the Dialga, or a high roll turn where you're able to Thornton, double Archaludon, evolve, attach, which is like, that means you didn't get IO node last turn and you happen to have the Thornton unless you're playing Luminion, but then that's an extra liability. So definitely a lot of things have to go its way. But I do feel like the shift in gears you can do between being like tanky walling with Archaludon and then going hyper aggression with the Dialga definitely opens up enough win conditions for the deck to be very legit. And the fact that it's so easy to just start going. Yeah, it's like turn 2, you don't have to worry even about attaching an energy on turn 1, which that's something that Regidrago couldn't afford, right? Regidrago, you don't attach energy turn 1, it's harder to attack on turn 2. Archaludon, you don't care about energy attachments, you just care about finding a couple energy in the discard pile and then getting that third one with the Archaludon. So pretty straightforward deck, pretty simple. And I differ on 300 HP, definitely good enough right now to be worthy of tanking hits and withstanding. And then if you're up against something like Lugia, for example, you target down the first rat, all of a sudden it's 2-hit KO against 2-hit KO, but you have healing and they don't. So you're always going to win that. With Jamming Tower, you can get some good traits against Gardevoir potentially, especially after a little bit of early pressure. And if you have enough ghosting effects, I do feel like the deck it's legit. It's not outstanding, right? That's why it's not in the top 3. It can't do a lot of party tricks, if you will, with like the top 3, but I think it's definitely good enough.
So Pablo, since you're so positive on it, I have to ask, Is Scoop Up Cyclone the A spec, or do you think there's room for some innovation on the A spec in this deck?
I feel like item-based recovery like that is definitely the way to go. Just finding it, reusing, even things like Greninja on the same turn, Iono, or just finding that with a huge dig off of research can be very important, as opposed to Turo, which obviously is powerful, but then that means you didn't get any new resources to play with next turn. And I think that's why that and Counter Catcher are definitely staples in the deck, because sometimes you need to dig for pieces for the next turn or even for this turn and still have a chance at doing that sort of play.
Love the Counter Catcher call out. That's such a good card.
Yeah.
Brent, is Archaludon real? I know it knocked you out of your cup, so you got to be a fan of it, right?
Yeah, so I actually really think this deck is strong. I think it's very underexplored as well. It's like, I think things that we can definitely work on in general is like, I don't think the supporter line is like, I think it's debatable still. Like, are we running gears? How many gears are we running? Like, I don't really know the engine. Like, some people have Luminion, some don't. This is definitely something I'm like not sure on. But the things that I think I am pretty sure on is one, Dialga's probably the way to go. I think that. Two, I think Cyclone is the way to go. The main reason for this is I was testing Prime, and the problem with Prime is that since I don't run other switching cards, if I go promote something, research with the Prime, whiffing the Prime is just so bad. Where if I just use counter catches as my main gust, if I whiff, then usually I can attack with whatever I promote in the active. So I found that to be really annoying. So in the end, I'm like, I think Cyclone is actually just the better A spec. And I think I've come to the same conclusion as Pablo with that. And I think that's just because the alternative just has problems. And overall, I think I haven't put enough work in the deck. I think Gemming Tower is looking like the way to go now. I definitely think there's a debate between Gemming Towers or Pokestop plus Lost Vacuum. But I kind of think Gemming Tower is probably going to be the way to go. But another thing I want to note is that even if you just bench one Dialga in a turn, they can't, not really, no decks are really designed to boss kill the Dialga and hand disrupt. So for example, in the mid game, you can go Slammer Research, Fez, Ninja, bench Dialga, and if they boss it by the next turn with a second Conceal cards and a Fez, because you have all these stretches and everything, you've probably either discarded enough of your evolutions that you can stretch them back, or you just draw them between those last two turns of draw, that you can probably pull off the combo with the counter catcher and everything, and then you can basically just steal a game back. This even allows you to steal games back against Miraidon, Raging Bolt, and these are decks that something like this would normally really fall apart against. And I think we really need to rely on this exact combination to beat these decks.
So after Dre called it mid, I immediately got sold on it by Pablo and Brent. So I want to know from each of you, why won't Archaludon win the tournament? Just a very simple, like maybe it's a certain matchup, maybe it's the way the deck plays, maybe it's the people attracted to the deck. But we'll start with Dre. Why won't Archaludon win the tournament?
Gardevoir. I think Gardevoir's too big of a pop for it. And simple as that.
For the people my age, op means opposition, as in a bad thing. Pablo, why won't Archaludon win the tournament?
Because it whiffs the right supporter at the right time. It couldn't find the Thornton play. It couldn't Iono on a key turn and couldn't prevent a powerful response from an opponent. Or it whiffed energy at a crucial time because it thinned too many in the beginning and it couldn't find one at the very end.
And Brent, why isn't Archaludon winning?
I think it's just because the deck's kind of underexplored, and I think the draw engine, we haven't come to a consensus on what the optimal draw engine is yet. And I think there's not enough people confident enough with the deck and being like, this is like the way to play it. So the play rate's not going to be high enough, doesn't have the chance, and I think maybe the draw engine could be worked on a bit. Like, I still think it's a little bit over the place. There's not a consensus exactly on how we're meant to be running it yet.
Brent, is this your way of telling us that you're going to break Archaludon and win the regional?
Let's just say I haven't put enough work into it. Like, with a lot of these things, like, I usually talk the talk, but I don't walk the walk with a lot of things. And usually I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm talking about this, and then I'm just playing like Guardy for like the 17th time, or Drago for this like the 50th time or whatever.
The next deck, 2 of the 3 of you had it in your top 5, and Brent, you did a good job explaining why it wasn't in your top 5, but you did make it sound like it was good. And that is Miraidon. So in terms of online tournaments, and I know you 3 might laugh at it, listeners will probably laugh at it, but there is some semblance of reality in these online tournaments. It has been doing incredibly well. The play rate, still kind of mid, but the win rate has been kind of ridiculous in online tournaments lately. So Miraidon, do we think it is a deck that will do well into day 2 and then into potentially winning the tournament? Pablo, can you start us off on Miraidon?
I definitely think if enough people play it, just variants, a lot of those will high roll, others will whiff their generators and never play the deck again, and curse the day they chose to play it. So I definitely think it can have a deep run, and with good enough variants, it definitely can win. If Lugia ends up being quite popular, then obviously that favors the deck, because then you only need a Raikou usually to get a 2 prize on your first turn, instead of needing to build up all the way to the Iron Hands. So definitely think the deck has a lot of potential, as long as you hit the generators.
Brent, you talked how you think it is well positioned, or potentially well positioned. Do you think it's well positioned enough to win the tournament and make these deep runs?
I mean, we've seen it before where Miraidon is a deck that usually this deck is either has 0 placements. Like I'm talking 0 placements, and then like 2 events later, oh look, first, second, Miraidon. And then the next 3 events, there's nothing happening with Miraidon again. So I guess it's gonna be hard to say, is this the Miraidon event? Maybe. In theory, it's pretty strong against the top end of decks. Of course, like one of the biggest hindrances is that natural variance of the deck. It's not like it's not even like Lugia, where Lugia can play games with turn 3 summoning stars and win. With Miraidon, with missing the generators, your deck falls apart. Like if you miss the generators, you don't have those generators anymore. They're gone, and your deck can just fall apart really easily. And a lot of people are not only just scared of this, so the play rate's going to be low, but I think overall the variance makes it very hard for it to get that really deep run overall, despite having a solid matchup spread.
Dre, you were pro Miraidon earlier. Is it winning the tournament?
I think you can. I think it might. I think there'll be 2 of them in the top 8, just simply because there'll be a decent amount of them that hit the right matchups, get the turn 1 generators, and don't look back. And there's enough decks being played, especially in South America region. If like what I've seen in Sao Paulo and Buenos Aires translates to Mérida, Lugia being really popular, I think Miraidon can have a good run. I think there's going to be a couple players that just hit a bunch of Lugias, Guardies that can't answer, and catch themselves in top 8.
The last deck I want to talk about is one that about a month ago, not even a month ago, 2 weeks ago, we could not get through a meta discussion without mentioning this deck every 3rd sentence. And yet, we have not mentioned this deck whatsoever. That is Regidrago VSTAR. The top BDIF for the past 6+ months, whenever Kyurem released, is now gone because of a 30 HP basic. Brent, why is Regidrago gone, or are people just not going to play it?
Yeah, first off, I have to call you out. I mentioned Regidrago about like
Okay,
5 minutes ago. I did mention it. I didn't mention anything about how good it was, but I did mention it.
Fair.
So I think that it's definitely dropped a bit. I think even towards the end of Surging Sparks, it was like before Prismatic, because we're technically still in Surging Sparks. But I think it was really like fighting for that spot, for that number 1 spot, and wasn't really. It didn't have that dominant lead that it would have towards earlier times in the format. Things like Archaludon being on the rise. Archaludon is a strictly negative matchup for Regidrago. There is generally no winning line. On average, going second, there is no winning line if your opponent just starts attacking, and you need the right things to happen to win going first. So, like in general, the matchup is just not that good for it. I think it was worse than even your Raging Bolt matchup, and that's like saying something. So I think Regidrago was also already on the decline towards the end. And now with Budew, we have lost a lot of options like the fast Triforce, but the biggest thing is Budew punishes benching a second Drago before it was powered up. Because before you didn't really care, because if they went around it, you're like, if they went and tried to stall it and you had Gust, not Gust, you had Switch, like Prime or Switch, or just like attach double energy switch, they would fall so far behind and lose the game. So it's a real risk to bring up a second Regidrago. Whereas now, if I pre-bench that Regidrago and then they just Budew it, they might gain multiple turns, and that's really dangerous for me. And I'm not sure if the players can afford to take that risk with Regidrago. And of course, the alternative to not benching it is if they knock out my lone Regidrago, that's even worse. So I think this is the problem that Regidrago is facing in general. And I think this has just pushed it towards that tier 2 range instead of that tier 1 range that we've been used to seeing it for this entire time.
Dre, is Drago dead?
There's people that are trying to keep it alive. People are playing Crispin. I have there's one in my testing group. He's just fighting to keep bro alive. It's like, give him the Arceus, bro.
One guy.
Pablo, same question. Drago dead?
It's definitely not dead. It's still an inherently powerful deck, and I think from the top 5 decks we've mentioned, Dragapult definitely plays Budew, Guardy might, and then the others don't, right, on average. So I do feel like it can definitely stand a chance, but Budew might also be thrown into random situations, and I feel like that risk is what puts Drago off a little bit, other than the bad Archaludon matchup that Brent mentioned, and the fact that Budew can even, if you're not careful with your resources or whatnot, it can lead to situations where you're just out of resources. You're locked out of resources until deck out, basically. So that's definitely not an appealing thing. I definitely think it will be played. I do think it's still good enough to compete, but it definitely feels like it hasn't died, right? As you said, it's just now a step below where it used to be.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you all. Listeners, if you've enjoyed what they said, give them a second to give some shout outs and let them know where you can find on socials. Dre, why don't you start us off? Any shout outs you have, and where can people find you on socials?
Yeah, first shout out to Shuffle Squad, my sponsors, Ultimate Guard, Advanced CG, all those that make Shuffle a thing. Appreciate all of you guys. You can find me on Twitter at King Dre Clout, C1OUT, on Medify, the same, Clout TCG on YouTube, King Dre Clout on Twitch.
Pablo, what about you? Shout outs and where can people find you?
Shout outs to the Lake of Rage podcast for having me, and people can find me at TableMon every social media, even the new ones that very few people use. I'm also there, saving up those usernames.
Brent, what about you? Any shout outs and where can people find you?
I guess I don't really have a shout out. I guess I can shout out you and your podcast. That's about it. Yeah, you can find me. I have YouTube, Frentimon, Twitter. I have it's wet_goose. Those are the 2 main ones I guess I have. Oh, I also have Medify, / Brent Tonisson, and you can find me there as well.
If Brent didn't make that obvious enough, anyone out there with a store or who's looking to sponsor top players, slide into
I
Brent's
actually have a sponsor. I have a sponsor that we don't really need to shout them out on here.
Myself, you can find me on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Blue Sky at Mellow_Magikarp. Be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts, etc. This has been another episode of the Lake of Rage podcast. We'll catch you all in 2 weeks.